everybody. Welcome to SB's Academy, and here is yet another episode on learning business communication. So the topic for the day is the communication process and model. Now before we start on with this particular topic, I would request you to go back to my channel and watch the video on elements of communication. Now this particular topic that we are going to learn today, this topic has a great deal of relevance with the elements of communication. So unless you know the elements of communication properly, you won't be able to understand this topic. So requesting you all, in case if you have not watched the video on elements of communication, or you have watched it long back and you need to refresh your memory regarding the topic, please go and watch the videos on elements of communication first, and then you will be able to relate with this topic better. Now this particular topic that we are going to deal with today is the communication process and model. And this model has been developed from the field of information theory and has been developed by Shannon and Weaver. And therefore this is called Shannon and Weaver model. Now this Shannon and Weaver model is originally developed in the discipline of information theory, and it is also used in communications engineering. So those of you who are watching the video, those of you who have done your specialization in electronics engineering, you may have some idea regarding this. Or those of you who are pursuing your studies in higher studies in maths, you may have an idea regarding this. Now, before I move on to the details of this, you need to follow this particular diagram that you will get to see on screen. This is really very important, this diagram, because without this diagram, it is impossible for you to follow this particular lesson. Follow the diagram, follow the highlights, follow the arrows, because without this particular diagram, this model will be difficult for you to understand. So let's begin. So first thing that you will get to see on the screen, the highlighted portion shows formation of message. Now if you go back to your understanding of the lesson on the elements of communication, we have already discussed about the source of communication. That is, the sender is the source of communication. And one particular role of the sender is to form or create the message. So the communication process model is a cyclical one. As we have already learned that communication is a two-way process. It's a cyclical process. Here you will get to see in this particular model. So it starts with the formation of message. The message is first created and formed by the source or the sender. Right? When I am talking to you in this particular process of communication, I am forming the message as the sender. I am forming the message as the sender. So when I am forming the message as the sender, I am encoding the message. How am I forming the message? My message is the lesson for the class. How am I forming the message? See, the second step is encoding the message. I form the message by encoding. The encoding the message through words, through gestures, through diagrams that you can see on the screen, through my body language, through my words, through my speech, through intonation. Right? So once the message is formed, the message is encoded. Encoding means using appropriate word order or non-verbal techniques to communicate the message. So once the message is encoded, that is, it is ready to be delivered, it has to be encoded through a channel. It has to be transmitted. Right? Transmission of message takes place through encoding. Right? Transmission of message takes place through encoding by a channel. Okay? And through this channel, the message gets transferred to the receiver. See, look at the highlights on the transmission of message through a channel. Look up this particular highlighted portion on the diagram where the receiver receives the encoded message. Where the receiver receives the encoded message. So as students, when you are receiving my encoded message, you are trying to decode the message. You have to decode the message. Look at the highlighted portions on the word decode. We have already learned what decoding is in the elements of communication. Decoding means you are trying to interpret the message by your own words, thinking process and experience. Whatever I am trying to teach you, decoding is nothing but you are trying to interpret and understand the message by your own. Right? How do you interpret the message by your own? You try to understand the words within your familiar context. You try to put it up in your familiar context of experience. Right? Once you have decoded or understood, the easier word for decoding is understood. Understood the message, you are trying to form a feedback. What kind of feedback? Suppose while I am delivering this message and instead of this being a virtual classroom, suppose this would have been a physical classroom where we are physically interacting with each other face to face. While I am explaining this, suppose I have explained to you what decoding is. Suppose one of you, maybe you only fail to understand what is the meaning of decoding. So you form this feedback and you ask me, ma'am, I have a question. I ask you, yes, please proceed. You tell me, ma'am, I haven't understood what is the meaning of decoding. Could you explain it once again? That is the feedback that I get. You have formed the feedback in your mind when you try to understand the topic that, well, I can understand everything else, but this decoding is not clear to me. So you raise your hand and you ask me, ma'am, could you please explain what decoding is? And that is the feedback I received from you. And how do you encode this feedback? You encode this feedback by raising your hands and asking the question to me. You asked me specifically, ma'am, I have understood everything else, but could you please explain it to me? What is the meaning of decoding? That is the feedback I received from you. Again, this feedback that you have encoded is transferred to me through a channel. It is transmitted through a channel. Look up in the diagram. You will see again it passes through a channel. And I receive the feedback. What is the feedback I receive? That maybe my students have not understood well what decoding is. Maybe I have to use certain simpler words in order to make them understand. I have to be a bit more lucid in my explanation so that they understand what decoding is, because obviously these terms are new to you: encoding, decoding, human communication. These terms you may not be familiar with them. So I have to make my explanation more simple, more lucid. That is the feedback I get from you. Right? And once I have received the feedback, I decode it. How do I decode it? I try to explain the entire thing in more simple words, maybe with more easier examples. Right? Maybe with such kind of analogies you are more familiar with. Right? So that is how I decode the feedback. So once I have decoded the feedback, I know that I have to again give it back to you. So again I encode the message, I give it back to you in the channel. Look up the highlighted portions in the diagram. You will see how it works. Look at the arrows, follow the arrows. This is how the communication process and model works. Now, one important thing that you will find that is highlighted in the diagram is noise. What is noise? We are going to cover separately in a video in one of the coming days when we are doing barriers of communication. When we are doing barriers of communication, we will learn what is the role of noise. Now, suppose noise can be of various kinds. Like one noise that we all know, that is the physical noise. Suppose I'm teaching you the lesson and suddenly the class, like suppose if this is a physical classroom, the class next door, it is shouting a lot. Maybe they have a free period or whatsoever, they're shouting a lot and you're not able to follow. Or while I'm explaining is somebody's mobile phone started ringing. Somebody forgot to put it in the silent mode in the class. So definitely there will be a distraction. Or suppose we are learning in a very noisy place, like our classroom or school or college is located in a very noisy place. Suppose there are busy roads all around. So however much the teacher shouts, however much you try to pay attention, right? The physical noise will always be a barrier. Suppose honking of car horns, or vehicles are moving past, or suppose the fans are too noisy, or suppose the public address system is not working. So noise is something that hampers the flow of communication through channel. Now this is only the physical aspect of the noise. I'm not going into details about the physical aspect of the, I'm not going to go into details, but again there is a psychological aspect of the noise. We are going to deal with this in details when we are talking about it in barriers of listening, barriers of communication, sorry. Got it? So I hope this particular model of communication is clear. So what are the important concepts that we have seen? Let's take a look at the important concepts that we have covered over here. We have talked about information source. Information source is nothing but formation and encoding of message. That is the information source. We have spoken about transmission through channel. See the highlighted portion of the diagram. This is called the transmission through channel. We have spoken about noise. We have spoken about message. We have spoken about the receiver. We have also spoken about noise. So these are the important concepts that has been covered in the communication process and model, what we commonly called as Shannon and Weaver model. Now this Shannon and Weaver model is one of the most common models of communication. It has various practical uses in the real life, right? If you try to understand the whole thing in the context of your classroom, between the communication between a student or a teacher, or if you're trying to understand this in the context of communication between the employees and the superiors in a workplace setting, you will find that Shannon and Weaver model of communication is one of the most commonly applied models of communication, and this is very important as well. So you need to understand one thing, that audience, like take for example this particular situation, an audience or a receiver who's listening to a radio or reading books, can this process be called communication? Think about it. Think about it whether this falls under communication. If you consider this to be a communication, you give reasons in the comment box why you consider this to be a communication. And if you don't consider this to be a communication, you give the reasons why you don't consider it to be a communication, right? Now, if you're asking for my opinion, that what would I call, like you're watching a cinema, you are watching, you're reading a book, or you're watching a series on your mobile phone, one of those Netflix series, is it a communication? Communication definitely takes place over here. Why? Because once you have read the book, you form an opinion how that book is. Maybe you are not directly or immediately putting forward your comments before the writer or the director of the series, but definitely we have the system of reviewing. You are reviewing the book on a magazine or a newspaper, or you are reviewing a series on the social media or on Google. So that comes as a feedback. So feedback is really very important. Feedback that actually makes the entire model or the process of communication a cyclical one. So that is all about this particular lesson for this week. Hope you have understood it. So I wish you all a very happy learning. Please go through the contents that I have taught, the previously taught, especially elements of communication. It will help you to understand this topic better. So that's all for today. Happy learning.
Thank you for watching the video. Subscribe to SB's Academy channel on YouTube for more such content. Follow SB's Academy's page on Facebook for SB's tips on grammar, vocabulary and communication skills in English. Don't forget to like and share the content. Leave your views in the comments and let us know what else would you like us to cover here. Happy learning.